What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to Carpool Gaming's The Last of Us post-show and reactions for our final episode. My name is Matt, and I'll be your host for this journey's events. I'm joined by the incredible $2 hero himself, Mr. Seth Sturgill. What's up, Seth?
Hey, buddy. Matt, I want you to swear to me. Swear to me that everything we're
Swear to
about
me.
to say about this finale is true.
Okay.
Okay.
We're going to get into it, dude. I cannot believe we have made it here. Thank you so much for everybody who has watched and supported this wonderful podcast of ours, this wonderful YouTube show where we talk all things The Last of Us. Of course, we'll be back for season 2 when the time comes. But before we get all of that, we have to celebrate episode 9, Look for the Light, and the season that was. Seth, we are going to be spoiling everything. We're going to be spoiling all of the things. So this is your final and big spoiler warning before we get into the nitty gritty of the episode, because boy, it was a doozy. We finally got to the end of part 1, the end of The Last of Us season 1 on HBO. What did you think of episode 9, Look for the Light?
Loved it. Loved it. I really think that just about every choice made here, including, we were speculating on this last week, how they were going to handle the ending, including the way they handled the ending.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like pretty much everything that was handled here was handled pitch perfectly. I have a couple of like very, very minor nitpicks.
Mm-hmm.
Like incredibly, I feel like when we're talking about this show and we're complaining, like most of them are very minor nitpicks.
Yes.
For me, like that's kind of with this episode in particular, it's like I'm telling you, it's like, I didn't like the way Pedro Pascal said you would just come looking for her, or you'd just come after her or whatever. Like it's like very minute stuff like that. Otherwise, this episode was great. And
Yeah.
I love the way they handled like a little bit more of like Joel's vulnerability and backstory, I feel like, in this episode, which we don't really get in the game. I felt like I saw a lot of people who were worried coming into this episode about us not having enough time to explore what kind of happens in this final section of the game. And I think that those fears were sort of unfounded, because the way that they've kind of truncated that kind of final section of the game, I think makes a lot of sense here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it allowed them more room to explore quiet moments of conversation between Joel and Ellie. And I thought it was great.
Yeah, I'm with you. I did have a couple issues, but overall, like, I loved the episode. The fact that they stuck the landing in such a visceral and
Hmm.
fundamental way. The fact that, like, we saw so much. We learned thing about stuff that we never knew in the games. Like, there was actual new lore here. We saw Anna, which, with Ellie's mom, played
Yes.
by the incredible
Ah,
Ashley Johnson. Like, there was so much here to really, like, chew on and to really just kind of get into. And similarly, like, so much of the game and the reason why the game was so incredible, and also, I will say, divisive in its ending, I think remains here, because I've spoken to some friends who have been watching the show that loved the episode, and they're like, but what is that ending? And I really think it's
hmm.
interesting that, like, a decade later, we're at the same place that we were in terms of having conversations about it. And I think that's what it is here. Whether you loved it or whether you didn't, the fact that this show and that this episode caught fire the way that they did, and the fact that they really did translate so much of the game here in such an incredible way, while also building on it, while also fleshing it out, while also keeping us on our toes, I think is a massive testament and a huge success to the way that everything that they did here. I loved the episode. I did have a couple of nitpicky things as well. For me, I do wish the episode was longer. And I
Yeah.
do wish that the pacing, I do think it did move a bit quick. Sitting at one of, like, the shortest episodes at just under 45 minutes, I do wish we had more of the ending, because I do think that there was a way to, like you mentioned, flesh out a lot of what led to that point. But I also think that because of a lot of, like, the jump shots that they used, a lot of the quick cuts in between the violence, made it, like, it almost disconnected you from it a little bit. I kind of wanted, and maybe this was just, again, more of like this is what I thought I was going to get, a mismanagement of expectations or whatever. I wanted, like, our longer one shot. You know what I mean? I wanted to see him move through sections of this hospital. I wanted to see that violence and that thing firsthand, because of how little action we've had in the show. And that's not a complaint, but because I think that is one reason why the action that we got here felt so much more visceral, felt so much more impactful, is because of how, held back they were leading us here. I just wish we had more of that kind of that punch to it. I wanted to see him
Mm.
move to that hospital. I want to see him, like I didn't feel any sense of danger for Joel through that entire sequence.
Oh, no.
And
No, no,
like
no, no,
I
no.
did in the game, it felt like I was fighting my way to her. This felt like more he walked to the hospital with a gun and then got there. I wanted a little bit more out of that scene. But again, that's because I have something to base it off of. I think this is where it kind of comes back to that us having played the game versus people who are new to it, that kind of that visceral and that very like hands-on feeling that we had with the game, I don't think translated as well here. And I do think that there are ways that that could have been handled a little bit differently. But again, I just think that the way that they did ended up, that really did stick the landing. It really was fantastic. And again, the fact that these are things that are popping out to us, and then these are the only things that we're really like quote unquote not
Right.
complaining about, but have criticism about, is just a huge testament. But let's kind of backtrack a sec here because we have to start the conversation by talking about the opening with Anna,
Yeah.
obviously played by Ashley Johnson, the game's Ellie. We finally got to meet her. We finally got to see how she was infected, and we got an answer potentially to why Ellie is immune. Seth, what did you think about our opening moments with Ashley Johnson?
It's such a great opening scene, and I think the scene does a few things in a very effective sort of way. Not only is Ashley Johnson incredible in
Mm-hmm.
the episode, um, and it's so great that sort of like passing of the torch moment where you've got I get goosebumps even just thinking about it, where you have Ellie holding Ellie.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, and it's absolutely beautiful. The way that scene was performed and delivered, the way that like they even just like little tiny moments that the Ellie, baby Ellie's like crying and she's like, "You tell him," like
Mm-hmm.
you're like she. It's so great, but it also answers the question again, like you said, at least potentially of how Ellie is immune, getting, with Anna being bit literally in the middle of childbirth, like
Mm-hmm.
literally as her water has broken, you know, she cuts the umbilical cord after the bite has happened, so
Mm-hmm.
it's probably already begun to spread. She's already got that sort of cordyceps in her. So that is really interesting on the face of it too. That's a question we've never really had answered.
Mm-hmm.
But also, this is giving us a little bit of story that we were supposed to get with the American Daughters DLC slash comic that was teased like way back when, didn't come to fruition. We're getting it here,
Mm-hmm.
and we're getting more context from Marlene because we've
Yes.
always heard Marlene say, "Oh, Anna and I were best friends. I was best friends with her mother. I promised I would look after her," and blah blah blah. Now we get to see it,
Mm-hmm.
and the way that Merle Dandridge plays that scene was beautiful. Like I love just the sort of she had to like have that snap in her head where she comes in and just coldly like executes her.
Mm-hmm.
But it takes her a long time to get there, and she didn't even think that she could do it. And you realize how much she stands to lose
Mm-hmm.
from Ellie and the weight of all of that. And that's additional context that we'll get presumably in season 2, but it's nice to get shades of it here,
I'm with you
you know.
entirely. I think like that scene was incredible for a lot of different reasons. Finally meeting Anna and like Ashley Johnson just absolutely incredibly
Oh,
destroying that performance, just like feeling the weight of every word coming out of her and like just again like you just feel you could see where Ellie came from. You could see how much Anna
mhm.
is like Ellie, the confidence, the even in this like in the face of her ultimate demise, how strong and incredibly powerful she was in those moments. The fact that again she was happy and like smiling and like as she was holding Ellie and trying to calm her down, like there was just so much evident love there that just like came off the screen in such a fundamental and visceral way that it was just incredible to watch. And then similarly, like with Marlene, her being there and her being ultimately Anna's end, and then just her just seeing Ellie, like we literally had her since she had her since childbirth, like
Yeah.
literally since childbirth, just brings so much more to her decision towards the end of the episode. And then ultimately also just makes Joel's decision in response again, like the way that they built that up and the way that everything kind of came together just ultimately felt so much more impactful in her decision, and you could just feel the weight. You could see the horror, like it was subtly there on her face when she was telling Joel, like, no, you can't go see her. Like
Yeah.
she's going to surgery. Like this was the decision. And very definitively telling us now that like she's not going to make it through that surgery. If I remember
Yeah.
correctly, the game kind of made it a little bit more ambiguous because I don't know if they said that she would die and that like they weren't sure whether it would work or not. But like the way that all of that comes together is just incredible, and I just like huge shout outs to Ashley Johnson and to Merle Dandridge for just like and how incredible that moment must have been for them, for like again a
Yeah.
journey that started over a decade ago for them to now be on one of the biggest platforms with millions of people watching them kind of bring that full circle was incredible.
Totally.
And like I do like I think that was something that I was really nervous about was the explanation. How
Mm-hmm.
did or how does Ellie manage to be immune? And I have to say, I think they had a gargantuan task answering that question, and I'm happy with what we got.
Yeah. I'm like, I totally buy it. For me too, it also is like this is such a one in a million thing, you
Yes.
know? And it's also the kind of thing that none of them would know. And it's also like because I feel like the answer to that is going to remain ambiguous. We have context now and we can make assumptions,
Hmm.
but it's not as if suddenly it's like, okay, well cool. The cure is let's just have another person get pregnant and like
Yeah.
have them get bit in mid childbirth. Like we don't know if that's exactly what happened. She truly is a miracle,
Yeah.
you know. And like the circumstances of her birth and her immunity are so rarefied. It really, I think, accentuates everything. And I think too, like adding that extra texture to Marlene's character was important because playing the first game, you know, in the second game we get that scene of her talking to the doctor and like saying all of this stuff and how she was friends, you know,
Yep.
but we don't get a lot of that in the first game. We don't really feel it that much. She's
Hmm.
much more cold
Yep.
because we're just seeing it through Joel's eyes. And here, like getting to actually see all of this play out and feel the history is so important. I think adds a very important texture to her character.
I'm completely with you. So then, of course, we move past, catch back up with Joel and Ellie a little bit down the road as they're walking down the highway to try and get to the hospital. And then again, we get to a moment that a lot of people have been waiting for. One of the moments of
Yeah.
true beauty and calm and childlike wonder that we got in the game with with the giraffes. And I thought that this moment translated beautifully. I was a
Yeah.
little bit worried again about like the CG and stuff, but I thought that they did a fantastic job going into it, and I think that this moment hits just as hard on screen as it did in the game. What did you think about finally seeing our
Agreed.
giraffes?
So good. It was great. And it's nice too because you've got and it's similar in the game where Ellie is sort of she just had an incredibly traumatic experience, right? And she's just sort of listless and she's kind of there, but in that moment we're getting like little shades of of Ellie, being a kid and we see Pedro Pascal sort of looking at her warmly like he's taken his daughter to the zoo.
Mm,
You can almost see on his face like the memories of taking Sarah to the zoo like flooding back to him or something, you
yep.
know? Like you can almost feel that from him. And then when that the conversation they have on the rooftop looking at the, literally the giraffe reuniting with its family, and that sense of familial connection even with these giraffes where they're looking over it and Joel has that conversation like, "Hey, we don't have to do this.
Hmm.
We can turn back now and we can just be together or whatever." And Ellie, it's so funny because a lot of people you're totally right. The conversation has been drudged back up of like the ending and the
Yeah,
implications of the ending and would Ellie have signed off on it if she knew? Well, yeah, she would have, and she says it
100%.
here.
Yep.
She's like, there's no turning back. It can't be for nothing,
Hmm.
right? It's a classic, iconic moment, and I'm very glad that they really, just like they've done with most of the show, the iconic moments are untouched. They
Yep.
just leave them what they are, you know.
Yeah, 100%.
So
Yeah, that entire conversation again, like huge, kudos to Bella and to Pedro for really bringing that home. Like we really see that vulnerability from Joel more and more. We really see the way that he looks at her has changed, has fundamentally
yeah,
changed. We see the care and the understanding, and then him talking about Sarah as they continue their walk up and everything else. It just they nailed every bit of that. of course, leading to, them getting knocked out, and then, him coming back too in the hospital. And I think this is kind of where, I liked a lot of what they did, but at the same time, I kind of wish that that moment that did have a little bit more room to breathe, just because I feel like the quick cuts and the kind of quick deaths disconnected. If I almost feel like it went too video game in that moment, just
Mm,
because it did seem like, a kill montage, like a montage, right? Like, for them having very grounded and very like realistic violence leading us up until this point, I kind of wanted to see him struggle a bit more. I wanted to see him fight to get to her, right? Like, he makes that choice to start taking everybody out and to go, and we see that in that opening moments with the stairwell. I wanted more of that. I wanted more of that. I wanted to see him move. Like, I think like a like like your Daredevil, like one, like single shot take would
sure.
have been so
Yeah.
cool in a moment like this. Not to again have Joel flipping all over the place, but to put him in situations where he has to make it out of this and he has to get to her. He went a little bit too like Terminator in that moment for me, in my opinion.
Mm.
But what did you think of that sequence?
It's funny. I got the sense from this because you mentioned the disconnection. I think that I feel anyway that it's intentional. Because one of the moments that we flash back to, even in the sort of like previously on, in the beginning of the episode, is the moment where Joel blacks out and kills that dude in episode
Yep.
one when he has the PTSD flashback to losing Sarah, and I think that's more or less what happens here.
Hmm.
I think he's got this like I'm not losing another one, man.
Yep.
And for him, it's not even a decision. It's not even
Yep.
like a fight whatsoever. It's this is happening, and like I think that he definitely wants to like fight to stay alive, but it felt like even the audio in that moment is sort of like muffled, like he's
True.
almost got this glazed over look on his, like he just, dude, he kills a guy who like surrenders to him.
Yep.
No mercy.
No.
The dude like surrenders, pop, done. Like not even a question. He goes in, like grabs ammo and moves on. Like
Hmm.
he's completely disconnected, to your point, from everything that's happening. It
Interesting.
doesn't matter. All that matters is her. That's
Hmm.
it. You know?
I
And
Go
yeah.
ahead. Yeah, I think that's a
No,
really
no,
interesting take. Like, I think like I maybe you're right. Maybe that was more intentional than I'm kind of letting it on to be. I think it's just a difference in, like, again, what I wanted and expected out of that scene and what we got, and just kind of coming to terms with that, the difference there.
yeah. It's a different flavor for sure, because I think you're always going to get a little bit of that when you're talking about a TV show versus a video game,
Hmm.
because like you're right, in the game, like it definitely is like a scramble. It's like, oh my god, like I'm, like it's a struggle, like I'm having to fight and scavenge and
Yeah.
hide and and stuff like that. And with this, you're essentially seeing like it feels like you're watching footage from like the Columbine shooting or something like that. Like it feels like disturbing and
Yeah.
disconnected and totally like out of reality almost.
Right.
I think intentionally so. I think that we are seeing a bit of a different Joel here. We're seeing a much more, I feel like, traumatized Joel
Hmm.
in this one.
And
So it's interesting. It's a different take.
yeah, it is entirely. And like, I did like that, the fact that like he kept swapping out guns, like very very The Last of Us in those moments, with
Yeah,
him swapping guns out, picking stuff off the floor, and just kind of running through with whatever he had left. And then of course getting to the operating room. Also, like, we're gonna get into spoilery stuff here for part two as we kind of
yeah,
finish talking about the episode and talk
have
about
to.
where we're gonna go in the second and third seasons. So if you don't want to know anything, I would kind of turn back now. But like, well, first off, I just want to shout out, like, awesome seeing Laura Bailey as one of the nurses.
Yes.
What a fantastic cameo, and to bring that character there and to have Abby in the room. We got a version of Abby, the multiversal Abby. And even having, like, with the doctor, like, them kind of lingering in a
Totally.
very specific shot on him on the floor. With the way that his head's tilted, with the way that the blood is coming out. Very, very, very purposeful in those moments.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
you could feel them very much setting up what will come in it will come next. And again, similarly, like, I'm glad they didn't hold back in those moments. And
Me too.
I thought, them grabbing, and then, of course, the showdown with Marlene, with everything going down there, and then getting to the to the final conversation. But what did you think about the operating room, and then finally going down to the showdown with Marlene?
Yeah, so the operating room scene is so I really kind of thought I was curious how they were going to handle this because I came into this sort of expecting that they were going to use this as an opportunity to maybe plant some more seeds for part 2.
Yep.
I thought I thought that maybe we were going to the conversation that Marlene has with him in part 2. I thought maybe we would see that in the
Mhm.
show. I thought that maybe that would sort of just like set this dude up as more of a character,
Mhm.
versus just, random doctor. Personally, I sort of feel like him being like random doctor, being somebody who has a daughter who becomes a major player in part 2. I think that is an actually pretty effective effect there, but I know that there are people who don't agree with that, who sort of feels like it came out of nowhere and who's this random, person. I like the randomness of that, but I did expect that they were going to deviate from that in the show. I thought he was going to become a character who, with a name. I think the dude's name is like Jeff or something like that. I thought we were gonna get some of that. It's interesting to see Laura Bailey in here. I hope that that isn't just like a one and done cameo. I
Mhm.
hope that they work because very specifically, Joel doesn't kill her, or
The
he
nurses,
only
yeah.
shoots the one, right? So he only shoots the guy, and like you said, they very intentionally linger on the shot of him because that's totally going to be like when season 2 starts and it's like previously on The Last of Us, we're
Yeah.
gonna see that shot again.
100%.
You know, we're honestly we're probably going to pick up right there with Abby running into the room, like literally.
Could
You know
be,
what I
yeah.
mean? So anyways, but I thought it was really great, and I hope that Laura Bailey's character becomes like it'd be interesting if she becomes like a real player. Like that nurse could very easily be somebody who is a major player in
Mhm.
season 2 or whatever, and I hope she is because it's great to see them kind of like minding their past and allowing the actors who made these characters in the game be a part of the show. I
Mhm.
think that's so great, and it was cool to see that kind of carried forward with Laura Bailey. Hope we see more of her.
Me too. And like I do think that like I and this is something that I kind of went back and forth with, especially as we had conversations kind of leading up to this episode, is how much of part 2 do we see here? And I think the
Hmm.
kind of the thing that I've landed on is that not knowing, not having, because like the cliffhanger is a very tantalizing thing to do, right? They end
Right.
very intentionally on Ellie's face in the same way that the game ends with you having a massive question mark of what comes next. They could have had Abby run in that moment. They could have had
Hmm.
something more intentional, but then that starts to drop expectations. That's starting to bring back this is what's going to happen in season 2, which is a very easy thing to do in television, in movies, this tantalizing
Right.
end bit of what comes next. And ultimately, I'm glad that they didn't do that, because I
Me
think
too.
going into part 2, expectations unknown, ends up being incredibly meaningful. The fact that even coming into the game, we knew nothing. We had questions, we had theories, we had trailers that didn't tell us much of anything at all. And I think keeping that kind of surprise, I do think that you're right in that I think we will see him as a character in the second season. And I kind of previously theorized, because both like, how do you keep Pedro around, right? Outside of like the flashbacks, and kind of
Right.
what I'm thinking is we're going to see a little bit more of Joel's past alongside as we get to learn about the doctor, because I really do believe, like they've made mention to the group, right? The group that Joel and Tess and Tommy were all a part of initially as they were trying to survive. I really genuinely believe that maybe that doctor was a part of that group. Maybe there was more connection here that they
Hmm.
could lay down and make them more meaningful. Would Joel
That could
know
be
it?
interesting.
Would Joel know in that moment as he enters the operating room that that's the guy that he possibly previously traveled
He
with?
wouldn't
Of
care.
course not. He was,
Yeah.
he's in full Terminator mode. So I do
Even
think
if he did, he wouldn't care. It wouldn't have
exactly.
changed a thing.
No,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
like there's opportunities to do stuff there in a really interesting way that I think can and should be fleshed out in season 2, right? Like I am glad that they kind of kept the integrity of the ending of the first game intact without giving into that urge of the just one more thing. Are you excited?
Hmm.
Here's why this is exciting. I'm glad that they
Right.
didn't do that.
I agree. Yeah, there's got to be temptation there on the part, and I think that's why coming into the episode, I expected them to give into that temptation, but I totally
Exactly.
agree.
Yeah.
I'm glad they didn't, because they it would have been, yeah, it would have been easy to like plant those seeds now, and I'm glad that they don't, especially because you see like all of the kind of like mixed reception that that choice gets online. And if you're Neil Druckmann, there has to be a part of you that's like, do I go
Yes.
back on this
Yes.
decision now, and kind of soften that blow for people? But I'm glad, to your point, I'm very glad they didn't. There's I want to circle back really quickly to a
Hmm.
moment, that conversation that Joel and Ellie have, where Joel reveals that he like had a suicide attempt,
Yes.
on
Yes.
like early on. What a great little conversation that is. And I love like that moment of connection where like Ellie says like, well, I guess like time does heal all wounds. He's like, it wasn't time that did it,
Hmm.
like that wasn't what it was her, and I love that so much. What a great little scene in there. And I love that like in that moment they're totally, bare to
Yep.
each other emotionally. Like they're totally like, this is what this is. Let me not leave a question in your head of how much you mean to me.
Hmm.
Like you are the game changer for me.
Yep.
And I love that moment so much. Like,
I
oh, it was really good.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that because again, that's not a scene that we had in either one of the games. That question has never really been answered, and for us to now see Joel in what would have been his most vulnerable state in a situation where he saw or he didn't care to see any other way out, for us to get that admission of this was a decision that I tried to make and I couldn't. I couldn't do it, which is
Hmm.
again like running theme of Joel is his failure to protect her, his failure to protect others, the kind of weight that he puts on himself. And again, he even failed in that moment, you know, like incredible stuff. And then like even in that conversation, that could have very easily gone too much into like the cheesy side, or if he was like, "That's right, Ellie, it's because of you." But again, the way that they
Right.
the way that they deliver that, just that one line, it wasn't time. And then that
Yeah.
was it. That was all they needed to say. They did not have to make anything more out of that moment for them to both completely connect and understand
Perfect.
where they were at.
Perfect.
So
Yeah.
I'm with you there. I'm glad you brought that scene up. And then of course we get the escape with Joel and Marlene's showdown in the parking garage. Again, pretty much 1-to-1 with what we
Beat for
got from the
beat.
game. Even like the switch to the car and then the switch back. Just brilliant little moments there. How did you feel about that translation?
Yeah, no, it was pretty much beat for beat like the game. I mentioned this earlier. This is incredibly nitpicky, but I didn't like his delivery of the like you'll just come after her kind of
Hmm.
thing. Like in the game, it's very like kind of cold. Like it's very sort of just like Joel knew that he was gonna kill Marlene. Like there was no question
Yeah.
at all. Like he
Yeah.
didn't even try to like pretend. Like it was
Yeah.
always gonna happen in the game. And just like I don't know, it's again very very nitpicky. This is such a stupid criticism, but like just the way Pedro Pascal like said it and like performed that scene didn't like really land for me. In the game, it felt a lot more like visceral. Like it felt a lot more like she was just one more box to check before he
Yes.
hopped in the car, and like you know what I mean. So, but otherwise, yeah, it's essentially beat for beat straight out of the game.
100%. And yeah, I'm with you with that delivery a little bit because again, like the moment in the game is just such a shock because of how cold he is in that
Yeah,
moment, and we got a little bit more emotion through on that scene than I think that again, I'm with you there. I think it was a little bit too much of
like hesitance, and
yeah.
I'm like, no, there's
No,
no
no, there's no
hesitance.
he didn't hesitate at all. Of course, then finally leading to, the escape, the return to the outskirts of Jackson, and what will be one of the most important conversations that either one of these two characters will have throughout the entirety of their lives. With, and like that's something that Senna asked me right after. She's like, why did he lie? Right? Like this
Hmm.
moment is again is has controversy around it, has conversations around it. There's so much going on with so many questions as to why. And like, I think that is one of the hallmarks of something that is truly great. I think the worst thing they could have done is made that moment not memorable. And in the same way, like I said already, the same way that they leave you in the game, they leave you here. The shot of Ellie's face, of Bella completely selling that scene
So good.
was just incredible. Like that moment just completely stuck the landing.
I totally agree. Yeah, they and I like I mentioned this last week. I was like, I hope they don't change a thing. I
Hmm.
want the musical stinger to be exactly where it is, just like in the game. Like, and it is. It's again beat for beat how it is in the game. And anytime that there's been a situation where it's like it was already perfect, don't touch it.
Hmm.
This show has more or less done that,
Yep.
where it's like it was perfect, don't touch it. And yeah, like it really is the mark of great art, right? To be able to still have these conversations just like we did like over a decade ago
Mm-hmm.
over this ending. It really is what makes The Last of Us a truly special story, is that we can still, it can still have the same impact delivered exactly the same way.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And I just, yeah, I think it's wonderful. Bella's like just her performance in that final scene, I mean, is so breathtaking because she's back to that kind of like quiet state. She kind of explodes. Bella, I feel like maybe even more so than in the video game, you can read on her face almost like, okay, I don't believe you. I'm making myself believe you.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like that is almost even more on her face, I feel like, than it is in the game. So
100%. I think you're spot on there. And then of course leaving us with the tease of things. Well, no, with no tease, with the hope for things to come. With the idea of we know we're getting more. Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann are already talking about.
yeah.
That part two will be more than one season. They are adapting that. So I kind of the final conversation I want to have here. This second final I guess is before we start talking about what we think comes next, I just want your thoughts on the first season as a whole. What did you think?
It was great. I've seen the complaints of people who wish there was more infected
Mm-hmm.
in the show. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think there was just enough personally. Like I didn't really need this to become the Joel and Ellie versus Clicker
The Walking
show.
Dead.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't need that from this show. Like this show and even the game was never about that. To be honest with you, like I like the game, but like that is my least favorite part of the game is
Mm-hmm.
playing it. You know what I mean? Like I'm here for the story and for the characters. So like I didn't really need that. And for me, I'm like you that big set piece that we got in episode 5, I
Yeah.
think. Like that for me was like cool. You have met my infected quota. I'm good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I have seen that complaint, but I was fine with it.
I think you're onto something there because, like, especially the infected, largely speaking, in the game is just a vessel for you to move through. There are challenges that you have to contend with as you move through, the levels to get to the next major story beat. And I do know
Yeah.
that of course there were things left on the cutting room floor that people were hoping for, but a lot of that, again, I think that we will see more infected in the second in what will come next because I do think a little bit more of them would have been cool. But I didn't want them to be an ever-present threat every episode, and we always have to
Right.
constantly be worrying about the infected because they delivered on making these things terrifying. They delivered on making these things a fundamental problem for these characters to kind of contend with as they move through. A lot of the way the way that they went, the choices that they made was because again they were avoiding these things. They're making sure that they weren't in imminent danger. I'm just so
Yeah.
happy to live in a timeline where The Last of Us has come out. It's hit. It is crushing ratings. It is so universally beloved and celebrated. And for all these conversations to once again come up, I'm so happy that this will hopefully or can be the blueprint for a proper adaptation of something that we all love
Hmm.
because there are so many of these video game adaptations that we've gotten some fantastic ones. We've gotten stuff like Castlevania. I'm hoping the Mario movie is going to be great. Even Sonic is a ton of fun because they understand what makes these things good. Things like Halo was a dumpster fire because it didn't understand what makes
Yeah.
this thing good. I don't need something as far as The Last of Us where it's almost a one-to-one recreation of what came before, but the reason why these things are good need to be understood, and I'm hoping that this will kind of be the thing that people will reference because unfortunately anything that will come after, regardless if it's The Last of Us or anything else, will be compared to this. The Mario
Oh,
movie will
totally.
be compared to The Last of Us. The Knuckles TV show will be compared to The Last of Us. It just inherently will by
It's a new
being
benchmark.
exactly
Yeah.
by
Yeah,
being
it's a
a
new
video game
benchmark.
story. So I'm hoping that you know, this as happy as this makes me, this also makes me nervous for the likes of Horizon, for the likes of God of War, because again, they've set the benchmark so incredibly high that it's going to be interesting to see what they do next. And I think that's
Yeah.
kind of where I want to go for our final conversation. And also, very quickly, I put out a poll on Twitter. We have about 40 responses right now. 72% said that the first season was amazing. 18% said it was great. 3% said it was good, and 8% said it could have been better. So again,
Interesting.
there's a lot of thoughts and opinions out there, but it seems overwhelmingly people really loved it. But season 2, dude, I need to ask, do you think we're going to have the same structure? Do we think we're going to get it back and forth? Do you think we're going to see more of the past? What are your overall thoughts and hopes for what comes next?
What you brought up something earlier that I hadn't really considered, and that is the notion of getting more Joel in season 2. I think that there is a temptation because the structure of the game is that it's very much Ellie's game,
Yep.
right? And Joel's involvement is told through flashback and things like this. I think it would be kind of cool and interesting to get a little bit more of Joel's past and backstory. And, obviously we're going to get touchstones. We're going to get your Dina and your Jesse and stuff like this. Like, you're going to get that stuff in here. And I think the big moments are going to be big. But this notion that they're not necessarily going to tell the entirety of part 2 in one season means that we do have more wiggle room to explore some more of this stuff. And I think that could be really interesting. And frankly, if all of season 2 was just The Last of Us Part 2, I think it'd be a hard watch. Like,
Hmm.
I think it would be like a tough, like, we've had some like emotional roller coaster moments. Like, all of part 2 is an emotional roller coaster. Like, part 2 is like a grim game.
Yep.
Like, that game, the things that happen in that game, the moments in that game, the things that Ellie does,
Hmm.
and the things that I think will translate into season 2, season 3, whatever it is they're going to do, like, are wild and hard to watch and like hard to see even in the context of the game, let alone on a TV show. So it's going to be interesting to see the way they approach this. I do hope that we get more of that Joel and Tommy backstory, because I felt like we didn't get a whole lot of that.
Hmm.
We got shades of it, we got mentions of it, but we didn't really get to see anything. So I think it would be kind of neat to explore that. I think that there's a lot of potential to flesh out the character of Abby more in this one, and to have like more of that kind of like backstory with her and her crew. So yeah, there's a lot of like room to grow here, especially if they are going to split part 2 up into 2 seasons.
Yeah, and I'm with you there. I hope we do get more from Abby and her her crew of characters as well. I hope we do get more Joel, because I do think like
Hmm.
a talent like Pedro, I think you've kind of knocked onto something there very important, because it could be very tempting to do too much of Joel. I don't want Joel in every episode. I don't need Joel
Right.
constantly, but I do think they offer a very unique opportunity to see more of Joel, whether it is through the cold opens, whether it is through certain flashbacks that may happen and certain flashbacks that we know will happen. I do think there's an opportunity there to flesh out Joel and Ellie's story together through seeing kind of, what happens over the time skip. So I do think they have some really cool room to breathe there if they choose to, if they so choose to do so. My biggest question for what comes next is, how will it be split? Are they going to, because of course, like the game, you have Ellie and then you have Abby and then you have Ellie again. But like, are they going to do the entirety of Ellie's side in a season 2? Then do they do the entirety of Abby's side in season 3? Because again, there's a lot that happens there. Or are we going to get something like an episode back and forth? Are we going to have them mixed together within every episode? Because of the various fundamental decisions that they made in part 2 to how that game was presented, obviously can't translate exactly the same way on screen. So I wonder how they're going to keep that together, because the way the what I don't want to be lost is the ultimate effect that the game has. Where when you first take over as Abby, I was like, I'm done. I don't want to play this anymore. What are they doing? It was confusion, it was anger, and the way that they pull you back around by the time that you get back to Ellie is a stroke of genius, and something that is ultimately like incredibly, incredibly well performed. I don't want that lost. However they
Mm.
choose to kind of adapt that the story, and how they choose to adapt the very the humanization of what are immediately set up as villains. I don't want that to be lost, and I think they're going to have to tread very, very carefully to make sure that that isn't lost, and that effect doesn't get kind of you know lost in the mix of everything. But I'm very, very excited. I'm sure it'll be a couple of years before we see this show again.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, it will
it's
be.
it's going to be at least a couple of years, but when it does come back, we will be back here once again to talk all things The Last of Us season 2 and beyond. Seth, this little mini series of ours has been such a joy. I've been, unfortunately, Court couldn't be here to join us on the last episode, but I wanted to
Oh,
thank
I
him
know.
for obviously, running alongside, all season, for you to join us time and time again. This has been a blast, and I had a lot of fun doing this with you.
Oh, super fun, super fun. Well, I mean, what a show. What you know, what a great, just thanks to HBO and everybody involved. And
Mhm.
I mean, like it was just it was such a joy to have this touchstone every week
Mhm.
for these past couple of months, to just have this nexus point of connection with everybody. If you're a fan of the game, if you're not a fan of the game, and you're engaging with The Last of Us for the first time, these are wonderful stories. And having a new way to talk about these wonderful stories, and a new lens to hold up to them every week, has been a total pleasure. I'm gonna miss it.
Me
I'm
too,
gonna
man.
miss it.
Me too. But I promise you, we will be back when the show comes back as well. Seth, if people want us to hear more from you, where could they do so?
You can do it right here at Carpool Gaming. If you're watching us on YouTube, like and subscribe. You're already in the right place to see more of me on the Nintendo Drive, which is our Nintendo podcast I do with Sean Capri and Lachlan. And you can follow me on Twitter at $2 Hero.
Make sure you go check out Seth and all the places. As for myself, you can find me on Twitter at Matt_SilverSoul, and here with the PlayStation Drive each and every week on Mondays. Come hang out with us, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back in the future. This has been us, and this was The Last of Us. We'll see you then. Peace.
Peace.